Hi all, Randy Green here, and welcome to another type of podcast, video / recording where I'm talking to Josh DePaul, and we are freely talking about the awakening process and our experiences in the awakening process as a couple, but also as two individual people that are looking at reality from two different angles, and in that way are discussing things from the energetic perspective of our experiences as part of the awakening process. So with that little introduction, I will turn the camera towards Josh and let him explain and describe what he has experienced, and I will add in my questions and little extras that I think is suitable to put into the mix, as well as what and where I need this conversation to go. All with the purpose of giving you insights in some of the processes between two people who are living the high awareness lifestyle. Thank you. Hi there, Randy Green here, and welcome to a video with Josh DePaul from Integrating Presence. Good to have you here.
Likewise.
And I'm testing a new feature here by putting on a video camera and talking to Josh. And hopefully at some point I might be able to talk to others, asking questions from their experiences of the awakening process and what it has meant to them to begin the awakening process. So with that introduction, that was a little chair there that got Josh.
She did a 180 on me. She had me expecting something else, and Here I am or not. So do you have any specific questions?
I want you to tell us about your awakening process. I began first with the Atlantis, but then Josh just said.
That's right.
Josh said, well, what did you say?
I said, well, I don't have any firsthand memories of that time period, so I would just defer it to literature and the way it's depicted in media and things like this. And believe it or not, as far as I know, my beard had nothing to do with Atlantis, but who knows, right? I mean, well, actually, it's probably a safe thing to say. Anyway, my awakening process, it can involve humor as well. But actually, some of my awakening processes, I talk about these dark awakenings. I mean, things were starting to happen and I didn't know what was going on, whether or not it was legitimate or what was going on. And so it was quite terrifying, some of the things that were happening. And I wish I could give you more examples, but I'm just gonna have to be vague like that for now. But what happened was I started meditating, and there was this significant amount of healing that was done very rapidly during those times. And I would say then there was no more reason to go back asleep. So I had when I first started, I've said this before, the first time I did it on my own for like an hour or something, there were some really potent memories that came up, and then they were released, like the charge of them was then released after they were kind of replayed. And then it was like this huge relief, and it was more of a healing. And then it was the next few days, if I'm remembering right, there was some kind of more mystical experiences or spiritually transformative events, perhaps. But then after that, it was a deeply healing process. It was almost like a life review that happened over maybe a year or two of things that had come up from my past. They call it psychological splitting, where things got too intense and I just kept going on while the material I needed to deal with got diverted, but all that kind of then started bubbling up. And so reliving these experiences that I thought I had forgotten about. And I was seeing how I was not treating myself well, not treating others well or skillfully. And then so there's a kind of a catharsis perhaps in that. I found myself calling up people out of the blue saying, hey, do you remember this? I can't believe I said that. I'm so sorry. I was like seeking forgiveness or seeking understanding, or wanted to at least reconnect with certain folks and things like this. And so a lot of times they didn't even really remember it, or it was like, oh, that's no big deal. But it meant a big deal for me. And then the ethical aspect, I could begin then to see how our behavior and things we do have a direct impact on our well-being. And I couldn't see that before. People were telling me things about myself, and I wouldn't see anything in that. But then once I could see it for myself, then it actually resonated. And
Yeah. How did I experience the awakening of the heart and my own awakening process? Well, that happened. When was that? Can barely remember it. Around 2005, and my personal process actually began with quite amount of stress and distress as part of the everyday life, where I could feel that everything I was and everything inside of me was struggling with the way that my life had turned out. Not that I was in any dire situation. I'd had that earlier in 2000 with my divorce, and where in many ways actually perhaps my awakening process began already there. And for me, the first part of the awakening was to break down, or reality itself, or whatever it was that was created around me began to break down, and by that forced me into eternal and internal processes of a psychological, emotional, mental perspectives on who and what I was and what I wanted in life, and how I saw my life unraveling before my eyes. Thank you, Josh. I think you are touching ground with a very important aspect here, and that is the awakening process that involves the understanding of how we actually affect others, as well as the awakening of kindness in our hearts.
that's a really important point too, because then after a lot of that was ongoing and some of it is cleared, then I had this like aching in my chest. I didn't want to tell anybody about it, because then I thought they would say, oh, well, go see a doctor or anything. But I could tell that it wasn't really a physical thing, but it was an aching in the front and the back. And yeah, that's when my heart, I felt, was started opening. And then I found these practices like loving kindness and compassion, especially for myself, really helped with that process. But it was not pleasant for quite a long time. But after that stuff kind of came up to be seen and cleared and healed, then you start getting into more pleasant feelings around it, and more helpful feelings, and how we can see that those things actually can help our everyday life in certain situations. Yeah.
Isn't that kind of meta?
It is, yeah. It was a loving kindness, or I like to call it unstoppable friendliness. Usually if you're friends with someone or are friendly, then you're not going to attract as much hostility from myself or others if I wasn't. Sure, we'll be met with indifference sometime, but that's more benign than hostility. It's known as an antidote to anger, ill will, these type of things too. So yeah.
Yeah.
It's actually just, to me, the metta, loving kindness, it doesn't even have to be that complicated. It can just be an absence of ill will, meaning that I don't want to hurt someone or harm someone, and that's all it has to be, just an absence of ill will. And that's metta. Loving kindness can be that too, I feel.
Is metta the connection between the heart and the brain field? I can't remember that one.
That's a good. I think we can have these notions or feelings and wishes, a well-wishing for anything, for our own brain, for our mind field, for the minds and hearts of others, the bodies, whatever perception, however we perceive beings. It's classically taught as towards other beings and ourselves. But I think it can go further than that. You can have goodwill and kindness and a lack of ill will towards, plants or a reality field. I don't think it's too far of a stretch. It's just this kind of felt feeling. But also people will visualize too in a formal practice and repeat phrases that help keep it on track. Yeah, and feels really pleasant.
How important is kindness and compassion in our awakening process? I would say that it is quite important, especially if we consider that in the full understanding of other people, we kind of need to have our heart activated to be able to sense and feel and have the empathic inclusivity of seeing people as they are, what their needs are, and how we can act in the situation with these people in a manner that responds to what we could say a need of our own to be seen, heard, and acknowledged, but also their need to be seen, heard, and acknowledged. And how do we meet up in between two individuals that have different energy patterns that sometimes collide and sometimes resonate and sometimes vibrate in harmony and sometimes vibrate in disharmony, and by that feel intrusive and create interference. The goal of all encounters, be it in this realm or beyond, is to lessen the ability and the distortion energies from going further into our fields in the way that we are around our own thought processes as well as others. But it's not just about our thought processes. It is also about our emotional patterns as well as the way that we energetically interact with each other in whatever meetup that we might have with either another living being inside our realm or what we could say other types of beings from other dimensions as well as other types of civilizations. It is important for us to recognize that all meetups are energetic, that we are made of energy, they are made of energy. We all have different types of patterns in our fields, which sometimes interact in a positive manner and sometimes in a less positive manner. Sometimes these energetic patterns are amplified by distortion energies as well as otherworldly technology or otherworldly types of energetic parasites. So when two people meet up, it's not just two people. It's not just their organic vessels. It's not just their emotions or their mental processes. It is two different types of energy systems that meet in multi-dimensions and are trying to align over a spectrum of multidimensional energies in an attempt to either create less distortion or progression or the complete opposite. What I'm thinking about is that when we talk about the awakening process, and in the spiritual communities years ago when I began my awakening process in the 90s and when I began to look up information, was spirituality and the awakening process was almost kind of intertwined with kindness and compassion. And then we shifted into the alien agenda perspective in the 2000s, where we had more and more different people coming out. There were a broad community of UFO researchers as well as spiritual seekers that try to figure out, are there spiritual species out there, or is this... Anyways, I don't want to go into that, but I'm just going back into the understanding of, okay, there was these different practices that have changed, and then our world has changed, and we have changed, and me predominantly in the High Awareness Lifestyle channel, I do talk about kindness, I do talk about compassion, because I find that to be a very, very important aspect of the awakening process that in a way has been forgotten. Yeah. But I don't want to go back to the classical approach, but look into humans today. Mm-hmm. How can we approach the loving kindness in our everyday life as it is now? Yeah. In the 80s and 90s, it's kind of went with the spiritual community. Those of us who were part of the spiritual teachings, as well as in the 90s and 2000s, were all about the animals and plants and save the planet. Sure. And things have changed.
Yeah, I haven't... My kind of formal point, if you had to do it, would be 2012 for this awakening. So I saw it from the outside. TV shows like Captain Planet, when I was a kid, they had these overtones of saving the planet, but can't really speak before that time because I was complete base program, or, just glimpses here and there, strange things here and there, weird stuff, but not full on this. Now, the other interesting dynamic before I address your question directly here is it seems like this isn't needed for awakening. How and but it can be, and this came to me. It can take you quite a long ways into it, but I think for a full awakening, what comes to me is that part of this has to drop away. But so many of us are so far away from there. I still recommend it, especially when it's helpful, you know. Now, how can it be used today practically? That's easy. I mean, we know in our own self-healing work, kindness, compassion, and by compassion, what I mean by that is acknowledging pain. Because a lot of times, me included, I'm crying out for my pain to be acknowledged, and it can actually be brought up internally, so it can be acknowledged internally without it having to be done externally. A lot of times, it's great to have friends that will help us acknowledge it, and then acknowledge it with care, at least the amount of care that I can muster now. You know, authentic care, and I have a long ways to go for that. You know, you actually care about it. And then the other thing is wanting it to release and wanting there to be some kind of peace involved with this absolute stress that we're under a lot of times, you know. So these heart qualities. So how that plays out in real life, just the compassion one's easier. Just the simple questions. Is everything okay? Is there anything can I help you in any way? Do you need any help? How can I help? Is there anything I can do? These simple questions, you know, and that way it's not me forcing something on another. It's just being there. And it doesn't mean I have to do what they say either. It's just showing that I'm willing to offer that and then give that to myself too. What's needed now? You know, asking that question, what's needed? And now too, because a lot of times I will spin off into stories about the past or the future or, you know, but right now, I mean, we can go into that later, but sometimes it's like a triage. Now kindness, I mean, a lot of times is it to ourselves, talking to ourselves. I mean, would I talk to my best friend or a loved one the way I'm talking internally to myself? And when we catch that, that's a helpful thing too, because a lot of times we wouldn't speak to loved ones like that, you know, but we speak to ourselves like that. You know, I shouldn't talk for anybody else, but you know, this internal dialogue that we tell ourselves, that's helpful too. And the practical thing too is just an absence of ill will. It's this just seeing where is this, do I harbor ill will towards myself or another, you know, which I don't find helpful at all in hardly any circumstance. Now, hatred's another thing. We can go into that's sometimes that can be like a last ditch effort for motivation, right? Anger, last ditch. If I'm being abused, then sometimes that anger can be a motivating force, although it's very dangerous to wield, but it can give you a motivating force to get out of something. But I still think it's kind of the last ditch effort. But this notion of ill will, the other way is to turn that energy around and say, slay ill will. So use that energy against itself. So have ill will towards ill will, and then it kind of cancels each other out, you know. So where harm isn't acted upon, you know. So just being aware or not whether there's ill will, and then feel it in the body. More times than not, it feels horrible in the body, you know. It doesn't do anything but be unpleasant and harmful internally. And a lot of times it won't have anything to do, if I have ill will towards someone, they don't care. They don't know about it a lot of times, especially if they're not energetically sensitive, but I'll feel that ill will. But sometimes other processes override it and I don't notice how bad it feels.
If you in your own words should break down ill will, because that's a classical expression from,
Sure.
What I'm saying here is that
I would really want to inflict harm on another. That's it. That's ill will to me.
Yeah.
I want to hurt or harm someone.
Yeah.
Even if I know I wouldn't carry it out, I have this intention that that's what I would want to do to someone.
Okay.
And that feels, once I feel into that, it doesn't feel good.
Yeah. But sometimes when it's interesting, there's something I want to say here, but I'm choosing my words again, as always. When I'm releasing, well, we could say very angry spirits, they come across when they're going to my field, and I sometimes have to respond to it because it's in my field, and then in a way they amplify my emotional field. Of course, they cannot amplify things that's not already there. And my father was a very loud-spoken person, and he had his very specific ways of saying things. And he could, because he was under a lot of stress. And males that are under a lot of stress, they can become aggressive without it actually being ill will,
Yes.
but just to diffuse or let go or being frustrated or whatever it is. And it's not ill will, because it's not intentionally, the yelling is not intentionally, oh, I'm saying this because I now want to hurt my child, but it's letting go of the male steam.
That's anger. Yeah.
Yes. So, and because I have that in my field, and quite a lot of the angry ghosts that I'm releasing are, interestingly enough, males, which we could definitely look into why that is. There are also a lot of females.
Sure.
But the angry female spirits, they respond in a different way. They are driven by other types of emotional buildups. Whereas the male energy, because I have that outlet from my father as a pattern in my field, then the angry ghost will use that one as an access point. You can say, is there an affinity that because I have that signature already from my father imposed onto me, not born with it, it came into my field. Then, of course, I have that pattern, and that attracts specific type of energies where that type of behavior will be played out. But it's not ill will. It is an aggression that comes from hurt.
Yes, it is. And so that's that's one of the other things we have to distinguish. Is this mine, or is it theirs? And then in those situations in childhood, sometimes we're learning about these things, and we need to have a resonance with whoever it is that provides us care. So to be able to relate to them and meet them where they're at, so we can get the attention and our needs met. So sometimes it's a learned behavior, this, right? And so there's very few people, I think, on the planet Earth that haven't experienced this and are familiar with these types of things. So that discernment, I think, would be something. And it's also about whether I accept to choose this. There's a classic tale or something, like if somebody comes with a gift, right? And but I don't accept the gift, then who does the gift belong to? And well, of course it belongs to whoever gives it, not me, because I don't accept the gift. In the same way, is it possible, now I'm just talking on a human level here, is it possible if someone comes to me with anger, if I don't accept it, that's theirs and that's not mine? I'm not going to accept that. You take that. I'm not you, but who have the gift. I don't accept that. So, and then who does it belong to? So it's that's another one way to look at this too, I guess.
For me, as a person that responds humongously to all sorts of subtle energies, whether it's from this plane or other levels of existence, when there is a kind of outlet of energy that either comes from angry ghosts or other entities or other dimensionals or whatever it is, it affects my energy system. And then I can, of course, say, well, I won't receive it. I won't have it. I won't take it. Then my experience is like an annoyed child. You can only ignore the child for so long. It's still there, or the elephant under the rug, or people that are saying, well, you can just protect yourself from it. Well, not me. For some odd reason, that's never been the amount of interference I have, the amount of things I experience. There would be no way in any way or form that I could constantly ignore that. That's been part of my awakening process.
And by that, I don't mean ignore it. That's right. That's a really good key. You can't just ignore something and pretend it's not there.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily what I mean.
Yeah.
One thing is it's the other person, I can just talk about a human level here though.
Yeah.
But if the other person sees where it's not affecting me, then the fuel then dies out of that anger of the other person. Of course, it's going to be unpleasant for me while it's going through, but I don't necessarily have to fake it, because it is a practice, right? If that fuel is then taken away, the other person doesn't really have much motivation to keep on to something. But if they feed on me responding in the same way, because what I found energetically a lot of times, the tendency is to match the energy of who we're acting with, and it becomes this energetic game, right? Especially if someone comes with a stronger energy. The tendency is to automatically to match that energy so we can kind of be on the same level. But there's another option too. The other option is to stand firm and let them come with whatever energy it is. And this is another practice too. And then I can wait and I can choose what energy I want to bring to the interaction. So it is this energetic game. Like I will then have to intensify my energy, even if it's an energy of peace and kindness. I have to bring that up in order to, or don't have to, but you know, you can try this in your experience if you have a choice of what energy you want to bring to it. But then it comes like this energetic, sparring almost some ways, but then we have a choice. The other thing is, there can be a training, I feel, to respond instead of react. So that with the meditation practice, I found sometimes it just seems like I have more time and space in order to respond instead of react. Because then our natural tendency, everyone, as far as I know, unless you've lived in an ashram your whole life, is to react instead of respond. Mm. But there is a choice there. And sometimes the emotional intensity or something is just so intense, it feels like we're crowded in or closed in. And so can we have, it's ABC is this one teaching, a bigger container. So like you take a thing of salt and you put it in a cup, it's really salty, but if you take that same amount of salt and you put it in a pond and get a cup of water out of it, it's not as salty. So the more space we can have, and it also helps for having others hold space for us sometimes. And all these different strategies,
And I feel a very important thing to come in with here is that the way that you're addressing this, which is absolutely beautiful, is a male approach.
It is, and sometimes I think it's okay just to be completely decimated by it.
But when we talk about females, I'm not talking about being decimated, but when we talk about how many female teachers have been out there that actually are talking from a female angle? Most of the time, it comes from males. Even if you have female gurus or what gurus or gurines, I don't know what that is. Yes, then they are addressing something they have been taught from a male teacher.
Very good point.
And when we talk about compassion, the way to work with the heart field and the way to address, you were mentioning spatial features. That's a thing of the male brain. When you talk about the balancing as in kind of as a competition, as a kind of a standoff, that's male.
Game. It's
yes, absolutely. And the way many of these ancient teachings, they address this from a male perspective. Of how to soften the male heart and how to soften the male mind. So it's not just rational, logical.
And this is the active doing side, when with the more energetically sensitive and empathic, sometimes it's just so overwhelming and none of those strategies are available, and I'm just in it and there's nothing, it's just, you just have to wait it out, or I don't know what. Like you say, cry and release or have outlets and stuff. So I'm all for what strategy is most helpful and beneficial for our well-being and others, especially in the long term.
What if I provoke you and say it's actually not about the man finding the feminine side, which is the classical one? Because when I look back in time, and the Brahims that left, many of the ideas you have found useful in your awakening process are built into some of the original ideas that came from the Brahims that left Atlantis. They were one group that left Atlantis, and they went to the Indus Valley, where they, in history, are called the Ahats. So that's the lineage. And they were based upon lunar ideas, part of lunar humanoid series, white Syrian lunar ideas of how to work with energy and how to work with the mind and what they needed to develop. And they needed to develop a heart field. They didn't have that. And then they went through the compassion ideas. Whereas the solar people that were already living in the Indus Valley, they were more what we could say oriented towards what we today call mother teachings, the orientation towards progression, working in communities, working with the land together, and not the individual heart, because the moment you live not as what we would say pagan ways or completely in tune with nature, because that's not what they were. They were highly skilled. They had access to 4th, 5th, and 6th dimension of the middle domains. They remember where they came from. And the Ahats, they had what we could say, they came here to experience certain things they would then take back with them to their own system. So they had certain kinds of mental capacities they were not ready to let go of. And I see that incorporated in, for instance, the teachings of the Buddha, because he was of that lineage. So he was working intensively with enlightenment that goes with the cleansing of the mental fields, opening the heart so that the mental fields can be cleansed into a higher order type of progressive dynamic that would allow the white elder lineages of the Sirians to undo certain effects of the timeline event. And that's where ill will and these concepts come in as a very important, because they were male, they were humanoids. They did not have females. They ensured that the female ideas were eradicated from their systems, which we when we talk about male, female in terms of other dimensional races, doesn't compute. It doesn't add up because they don't have that gender division. But the way we interpret humanoids, or I interpret humanoids and I see them, then my mind says that's male. Even those I can see that are typically female, they don't have breasts, they don't have genitals, but they are presented as this is the female version of this species. Then they are typically warriors. So that's an interesting thing when we talk about gender in the other dimensions. But I just wanted to push in there, and I think at some point we could talk a little bit about, okay, how do we address this imposed on energies from others in terms of being a female? But that's another interview.
Sure. Well, there were three things that came up when you said that I think might be helpful is the body, belonging, and now I'm forgetting the third one, but maybe it'll come up here. So what is awful helpful is feeling these things in the body, because a lot of times I find when these things happen to really feel this physical sensations in the body, because it seems to dissipate further. And a lot of times when I'm unconscious of what's going on in my body, well, then my mind takes over and my emotions take over. But if I actually sit and feel it, it might be really unpleasant for some time, but it tends to wash through and dissipate a lot quicker. So yes, the Buddha did work heavily with the mind, but he stressed the body, he couldn't stress it enough, working with the physical body in a lot of ways that I remember. And I'm so cut off from my body most of the time. And so that one I really find helpful too. Now the belonging thing I think is really helpful too. You talk about more in community instead of the individual. All these strategies are based on our Western society, or kind of, or maybe, these aren't really taught in the Buddhist teachings. A lot of the things I told today, some of them were, and kind of mix and match here, but yes, belonging, we all need belonging too. So when this comes to a community setting, with relational dynamics between all these different groups, that's a whole nother ball of wax, right?
I think it's important to put in here when I talk about the original solar system humanities and the ancient version of their communities. They had very little to do with the communities we have today. It was not for personal interrelationships. It was for the sole purpose of putting together different aspects of what we could call complex energy patterns that would assist in transforming the energies of the reality field, again, also oriented towards the effects of the timeline event. Because the outer domain were hit hardest by the environmental solidification processes. Whereas the Sirian system, they were hit hard on the fifth dimensional, which is what we call the mental aspect. So thereby, their transformational process was all oriented towards the mind field and the layers of the mind field, because they had begun to, that code that goes with their mental, their original mind fields, and I'm here not really calling mental, but I'm using intertwinedly here, had begun to turn what we call into dark light coding. And they needed to restore that. Whereas those of us in the outer domain, because we had the connection to the sixth dimension and were mostly positioned in the sixth dimension, but were only traveling into the outer domain for different types of science projects, we had our middle domain energy system intact, but we were working in the outer domains to undo the effects of the timeline event in nature, in reality.
And very few people, especially males, don't have a reference point to that, right? Yeah. Unless they can have memories of that. Yeah. Other than maybe when we were a kid and we had an interest in nature, maybe we grew up out in nature and we had these interactions with nature and our friends in nature perhaps, but I do feel the feminine can way easier connect to nature. Although, again, with the meditation practice, can tune in way more deeply to so many things. The big thing I forgot though there was fear. So I think fear plays a big part into how we view things and how we respond or react to things and the strategies we use around that. So this thing called fear is a huge thing to work with because it affects so many other things because it's such a deeply rooted thing. A lot of these quote unquote negative emotions are actually different, or maybe seem one way interpreting, and they're actually different flavors of fear. Are if you go deeper and deeper and deeper to all these labels we have for emotions, a lot of them are fear, rooted in fear. A lot of times, or that's one perspective.
Yeah. I think it's important to put in here, instead of talking male and female,
Yes.
I would say I normally address it as the humanoid type of consciousness structure, as well as the original solar system or the progressive races type of consciousness that has been twisted into what we understand as male and females. And that's engineered for a very, very specific purpose, linking up to specific reality programs. But again, males can have the solar system or original consciousness type, and they will then they would be more connected to nature and these processes, whereas the male gender that are in a male body that is connected to more what we call humanoid processes will be more in their heads. So there are these different aspects of what maleness is in the typical male body with the typical male genitals. Whereas females with the typical female genitals, and we are now having so many new classification, it makes it difficult to nail down, say it's either this or that, but it becomes more fluent in these institutions, and that's part of the breaking down of the old world order programs. So for me, the shift I would like to do, and that's more important than actually looking at the physical form and what gender we have, is what type of consciousness do we have? How do we play out our consciousness structure? What is our main, what we can say, focus area to transform? And for me, it is, even though I've been working with people for years, I have always been more connected to nature and the work with nature and part of nature and life forms in nature, of which humans are part. But interestingly enough, in the original outer domains, there weren't life forms that had the human form. We came and went. We were there to take care of the outer domains and undo the effects. It was not until later that there became to be what we call seeded life forms that had human features in this reality field or in the outer domain. So for me, the humans are technically, in their original version, middle domain civilizations. They are not outer domain civilizations. So that's the transitional point for me to put in there, is that's how I would like to see people. Are you from the outer domain? That means the later seeding. Or you're from the middle domain? That's the original civilizations. And what was your original purpose and function here? Last remark.
That's a beautiful understanding of it, and I think that will just diffuse all this stuff that's been built up around gender. It's such a touchy topic. I think all that, for me anyway, can be set on a shelf for now, and I like just putting it there and going with your perspective. It seems way more helpful. The only thing is, I encourage people, including myself, to go up to this level, so where then we can see this or adopt this perspective, and hopefully it will be based on memories of the past too, if I can ever get there, if we can ever get there more, so where we can have this based on a remembering and understanding instead of just a theory, which unfortunately for me it is right now, but it's still such a beautiful, more helpful, amazing theory than gender wars or whatever is going on out there with all that confusion. So,
but in particularly for you and your process, where we can say that going into the body is definitely important, because the biofield and the emotional field are interconnected.
And nature is so much easier for me to do that. It's just like night and day when I get into nature. It's so much easier to connect.
Yeah. And then we could say, well, then in the process of awakening, you have activated your heart field. So you went through the process of becoming emotional again, but in a kind way, not just as in personally emotional, but the esoterics call it the buddhi level, or where the mind and the heart gets connected. So you suddenly have the capacity to observe yourself and others with compassion. And compassion there is the understanding as see people as they truly are, and be in that type of modality where you respond to what they actually need in the situation. And that's more difficult than just to ask what is needed now, because then that can easily be projections that you are sometimes when I'm having a humongous interference from some of the lesser positive timelines, and I am struggling with that, and I'm trying to cope with it the best way I can, and then you are kind and you want to assist, and you ask what is needed now, and that's other dimensional. So I have no answer. I have no answer to what's needed other than just follow the flow, go into the process, and then deal with it, whatever that is, going from the individual entity that I release, and then I go into the environment and the technology behind. So I know there is a type of code stream that needs to unfold its content so I can clear it from A to Z. So for me, the awakening processes where kindness comes in is just the beginning, where I can address the anger or the hurt or whatever comes there. I can meet that with kindness. And why is kindness important there? It is important because it relaxes the other being to see him or herself or whatever they are in a light of acknowledgement of, I am out of place, I am out of time, I have lost myself, I have lost the heart-filled abilities that allows me to work with a progressiveness that is transformational. And I know this sounds very lengthy, but that's for me what kindness is. The allowance of self-acceptance of who and what we have become, the self-forgiveness and the self-nurture to figure out what is, when you say what is most needed now, the way I would say it is, in terms of energy, what is it that I need to acknowledge and accept? What is it that I need to look at right now so that I can continue my progression journey, so I can continue my abilities to reform myself into a being that I can actually look at and feel balanced with, in right time and right place. It's about all of these, the ill-mindedness or the ill will or the response, the frustration to these dynamics are, for me, when we fall out of right time, out of place. We fall out of our code stream, so to speak. We fall out of the alignment of our energy system with reality as it plays into us, trying constantly to progress. And when we don't progress, then we get frustration, then we get anger, then we get sadness, then we get distortion or denial or whatever coping mechanisms that we come in with.
And another thing I feel is that such beautifully put. The other thing that's really important to remember too here is sometimes what somebody else needs the most is secondary to what I need then at that time. Sometimes what's needed for me to be most compassionate is strong boundaries, and reinforce those boundaries in order to give me the safety and protection I need in order to heal and then better address to meet that challenge in the future, and in making sure other people respect the boundaries and we have what we need in order to heal and re-strengthen in order to meet life on all the multidimensional levels a lot of times too. But sometimes we put on this armory and we never take it off either. So it's having the discernment to know that as well, right?
Yeah. Well, the one thing I would put in here, again, I'm thinking about, we were driving the bus the other day, and we had two incidents. First we had a homeless that had pissed all over himself, and he was thrown off the bus, where the bus driver actually responded, I would say, fairly well. And then we had a person that came onto the bus, and I will not mention other than also a homeless, and he was startled that he had to pay for the bus. He was not really in tune with reality. He thought he could go onto the bus and then just sit down. Perhaps he was accustomed to another bus driver that just let him into the bus. So he got started with the fact that he had to pay. And the bus driver, he kept his boundaries, and he was being strongful in his voice, but he was still being respectful.
Yes.
And the other person responded in all ways, including drawing the racist card and responding in all sorts of ways probably due to his age and his life experience. I would guess he was in his 70s.
There's lots of confusion there too.
Yeah.
Lots of
And
confusion, frustration.
what actually calmed him down was that finally the entity that was in him made him sit close to me so I could release it. Then the human calmed down. And all of the things that the bus driver did, everything that you tried to do did not help. It was not until the entity was out of him that he calmed down, and then he could just be the human that he actually was supposed to be.
I didn't really do anything other than try to pretend it pretend it wasn't there and go away, but that didn't help. So I'm glad for that, sweetie. So
Yeah.
this is the strong female warrior, being just sitting there, absolutely doing nothing in the physical, but all the things going on in the energetic that
Yeah.
was happening, right?
Yes. So that's when people classically talk about this, how are we to deal with aggression? How are we to deal with these? And kindness, for me, kindness in this situation is what is out of place, what is out of order, what needs to be released, what needs to be transformed. So that's how what I want to put in there.
And having the courage to do so too, instead of, getting in a fight or running away, how can we turn towards it and address what needs to be addressed in the best way possible? And that's what you did.
Yeah. And for me, since I can't ignore these things. If I try, they will just constantly stay in my field. So I have to deal with it.
Just real quick. I was not necessarily, well, a little bit ignored, but it was like, I don't want to pay attention to this and say, oh God, this is so horrible. Would you look at this guy, and just feed the same energy?
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it wasn't like I was turning a blind eye or the other cheek, but I also wasn't kind of feeding it and freaking out, because I knew that the situation would change and I could go through it without needing to get involved. Of course it was unpleasant, but then you step up and do your thing, and it was amazing. So
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, to wrap this up, there was a lot of good things to be said here, and until next time, take care.